All scenes with only My Hero Academia characters will be written in English for ease of reading, but the characters are actually speaking Japanese to each other.
This is for English that is not understood by the character. In the written fiction, it was represented with underline.
Tuesday, September 4th, 3:35 p.m. Toru's feet were starting to hurt so much it set the girl's eyes to watering. Tear tracks started on wind-bitten cheeks, but were quickly wiped off. At least she'd made it to the edge of town. Gray and taupe buildings of Western-style architecture closed in. Most were 1 to 2 stories tall and had a distinctly residential feel. A violent shiver racked Hagakure's body as she traversed a shadow cast by a rather tall apartment complex. The sunless section coveted the girl's heat like some jealous Yuki-onna. Coming to a stoplight at the end of the first block, Toru surveyed the area as a blue Prius passed on the left. A glowing white stick figure lit up on the far side of the street, and the invisible girl crossed at a set of painted white lines. Casting a curious glance at an excessively large truck parked at the side of the road, a flicker of resigned dread teased at the Japanese teen's mind. She'd only ever seen such large vehicles in satirical depictions of the United States. Movement at the girl's periphery had her looking back to the sidewalk. 2 people approached from the opposite direction, Hagakure's first encounter since dropping through the portal. Heart rate speeding up, she sidestepped quietly, then held still longer than was strictly necessary. The duo passed, ignorant of several red smudges that decorated the cement at even intervals. Toru's feet weren't bleeding a lot, just enough to make her nervous about being noticed. When the pair remained oblivious, laughing and openly holding hands in public, Toru let out a breath, then sharply inhaled when the woman spoke. It was not only in English, but it was fast.
So are you free Saturday night? I heard the mall here carries Halloween stuff all year long because of ghost attacks.
Toru could tell the tone was light-hearted, but the guy stiffened a bit. An awkward laugh blended in discord with the girl's carefree one as they drew further away.
Yeah, there are some really kooky people here in Amity Park.
The man avoided his date's gaze as the two made their way to the truck Hagakure had just marveled at. The insignia across the front grille read R.A.M. Okay, so it was confirmed. It wasn't just the signs. This town was English-centric. And unless there was a magic way to slow everyone's words down, the conversational skills Toru had learned in school were a moot point, which meant she was much worse off than originally believed. Mind racing, the UA student continued to vacate the suburbs, ambling towards the city's heart. Hagakure passed recessed doors framed by large picture windows. Beyond the glass, clothes and other odd items were displayed. There wasn't anything wrong with them, per se. They just felt off. It was in passing the 6th storefront Toru finally figured out what bothered her so much. The mannequins on display all had exactly 2 arms and 2 legs, and the technological items seemed almost old. This town was strange. How could so many shops afford to exclude people with mutation quirks from their clientele? Spotting a bald, middle-aged man wandering in one of the stores, Hagakure put on a burst of speed. The young woman jumped through the door before it could close, but misjudged the size of the man's portly stomach. The close quarters had Toru teetering awkwardly as she barely avoided knocking elbows with the poor guy. Not that he knew the difference. The warm air nearly made Hagakure dizzy with relief when the teen made it inside and righted herself. Leaving the entryway, the invisible girl mentally praised her quirk as she settled between exhibits of model trains? Then, surprisingly, her shivering increased 3-fold. Unable to think past the heat slowly suffusing frozen muscles, Toru just listened to the man behind the counter speak animatedly with his equally enthusiastic client. A lot of gesturing occurred, which seemed to center around one particular box of goodies. The exhausted teen let the gibberish of the two's conversation pass by, strangely comforted by the hobbyists. Eyes wandering, Toru relaxed further when she noticed a tuft of brown poking from the customer's back. The baby blue dress shirt couldn't contain all of the man's mutation, and the small patch reached for freedom for beyond the collar. Hagakure entertained the idea of a hedgehog-based quirk, but discarded the belief after moving closer. The texture was more like fur than quills. No longer shaking, Toru watched the animal guy leave with a railroad box set tucked under one arm and a bright smile on his goateed face. A bell chimed as the mostly glass door shut. Shoot. There'd be no leaving until another customer came, which, admittedly, wasn't so bad. Avoiding hypothermia was on the top of the to-do list until a solution to the no-clothes situation could be improvised. At least getting in here had been super easy. Hard to argue with good luck. A pleased feeling forced an optimistic smile onto Toru's face. Now that she wasn't imitating an ice sculpture, it was so much easier to focus. Okay, it didn't seem like people around here were particularly evil. Hagakure doubted this was a villainous city filled with awkward dates and miniature locomotive fans, but it was an English one. Going to the police might not be a bad idea at this point, but that meant she'd have to find a police box and somehow explain the situation. Since it was already getting later in the day, it made sense to prioritize getting clothed and scouting a place to sleep. Or maybe even finding a map and a local hero agency if she could swing it. It'd be hard without being able to talk to any civilians, but she knew nothing about her kidnapper, and being in a populated place did not guarantee her safety. Midoriya's encounter with Shigaraki at the Kyashi Ward shopping mall proved that. Now for clothes. Dumpsters sometimes had them, but there was a time crunch, and outerwear did no good if it was sopping wet or covered in mold spores. That was actually a terrible idea, the more she thought about it. A homeless shelter? Without being able to read or talk to anyone, it'd be really hard to find. Pilfering the donated clothes section seemed like a pipe dream, even if it was an appealing option. Raid someone's closet. The thought of going into a private home instantly made Toru squeamish, and the hero in training shifted awkwardly. Definitely a last resort measure. Balconies with drying unguarded linens? No, they didn't seem to be particularly popular around here. The apartment complexes were mostly fronted by slabs of concrete and plain skyscraper-esque windows, the hallways to access them hidden inside. Okay, that left taking from a store as the most plausible thing to do. Unless she could somehow make her own clothes from materials in the forest? Imagining a giant centipede crawling up her back, the teen immediately discarded the idea and nuked it with napalm. In fact, all vague plans involving camping out in the woods went up in smoke by proxy. Hagakure scanned outside the hobby shop at a flicker of movement, mind still reeling. The only thing in view was not a 100-legged nightmare, but a person. Pale blue face and mask of disinterest, the bat-winged human floated harmlessly by. Still, the sight caused Toru's mouth to pop open of its own accord. The person hadn't been in costume. Were the laws here so lax that quirk usage was allowed in public? Even America had licensed heroes. Where on earth could she be? Staring too hard at the window, Toru missed when the cashier's shoulders sagged and his whitened grip unclenched from the counter. Several more people passed, but still no customers entered the model train store. Waiting with growing impatience, the bubbly teen's thoughts strayed to things she'd actively been ignoring. Why was she here? Why didn't the kidnapper attack? What was the fight about when she arrived? Had a hero saved her? Or maybe she hadn't been ambushed because she wasn't the intended target. Or the villain had wanted to recruit her like how the League had tried to entice Bakugo. The spiral stalled at that last idea, kicking Hagakure out of the anxious flurry of thoughts that had beat like trapped pigeons at the inside of her head. It just didn't seem right. Bakugo had been violent, aggressive, the perfect candidate. Toru Hagakure was a happy-go-lucky girl that, if anything, came across as preppy. Ding ding! Startled, the UA student lunged for the door, battle instinct kicking in when her mind screamed to move. A chill breeze tickled bare skin. She was outside. Huh. Determined not to lose extra heat, Toru started jogging, tagging a few boutiques mentally while ignoring the sting of unshod feet. If a second-hand shop didn't show up in the next few blocks, she'd return. Toru slowed and lightly walked around a pedestrian. It happened a few more times, but was getting less and less stressful as the minutes went on. With things working out so well, it was hard not to draw parallels to some kind of top-secret espionage mission. Just as the teen was about to call it and head back, an ideal candidate for the heist came into view. Ducking into the place behind three people, the invisible girl immediately swerved right to follow them down a flight of stairs. It seemed the displays were backed by some kind of live-in flat on the first floor, while the outlet hunkered below. Stepping down into the store, mental alarm bells were set to ringing. The inside was significantly more popular than the train shop, and the teen's new evasive skills got tested immediately, as she had to practically dance out of a woman's way on lithe feet. Tiptoeing into a side aisle between rows of hangered clothes, Toru picked a careful path, avoiding the bargain basement's customers. She pulled nothing from the metal racks just yet, debating on how to get any selections out of the store without being seen. It wasn't like they could be willed into invisibility. Surveying the shop again, Toru noticed a small handwritten sign taped to a glass display that doubled as a check stand. Nearly antique jewelry peeked coyly from behind the laminated paper that held 5 colored dots corresponding to percentages. Red was highest at 70, while yellow sat at a lowly 20. Covertly checking a few tags to confirm her suspicions, Hagakure set about finding not only the warmest, but the cheapest red stickied items. At least the prices could be read. Numbers were the same in both Japanese and English, As a hero in training, there was no way Toru wasn't going to pay the owners back later. She'd even saved the tags for an accurate total. Along the back wall, there were nearly 50 tiered cubbies full of shoes and a bin containing socks. Most of the footwear was well worn, but the socks were brand new. Hagakure found it hard to mind the splurge, imagining soft fabric on stinging and aching feet. Checking over a shoulder for looky-loos, the girl grabbed a pair of the fuzzy tubes and tossed them down the back aisle. Following the sock's path, the chilled female walked along the wall, browsing for thick, warm shoes. Constant English chatter came from the rest of the shop, but tuning it out was becoming second nature. The teen grabbed the top of a pair of fur-lined hiking boots. Taking a quick look around, Toru made sure there was no surveillance, human or otherwise, before yanking them off the shelf and setting them as quietly as possible on the floor. A woman walked past a perpendicular aisle in view of the suspicious activity, prompting Hagakure to let go. When the lady moved on from the end of the row of sweaters, the invisible teen unlaced the boots, only stalling 2 more times when a shoulder came into view. Still vigilant, Toru picked up the socks she'd chucked onto the floor earlier. She stuffed them into the first hiking shoe like a present into a Christmas stocking, then shoved her foot into the second one to test the fit. The hidden female froze, half-shod, as a stupidly fast guy practically power-walked into the space and examined a pair of loafers. Lifting them up, the young man took a perfunctory sniff of the air over top, then put them back with a mild shake of the head and a scrunched-up nose. Hagakure held her breath at the brunette's claustrophobia-inducing nearness before the dude pivoted and stepped straight toward her. The internal panic was instant. If Toru moved, the boot would move, but to stay still was a surefire collision path. She couldn't let him touch her. Limbo may have been an option had the thief thought of it, but instead she bolted, feet thumping loudly against the floor. Grabbing the other boot and passing, Hagakure dodged the human obstacle that spooked her. The young man covered a shaggy face in defense of the suddenly audible, yet unseen stampede.
Ghost!
It wasn't long before the entire shop was yelling the strange English word in the same way a civilian might scream villain. Shoppers and employees alike fled in terror. Cover blown, Toru zipped around the shop, grabbed everything she'd scoped out earlier, and made a break for it up the stairs. A gangly sweatpant leg fell out from the wad of clothing and landed beneath her non-booted foot. The fleece-lined tripping hazard nearly caused a tumble, and a bra dislodged from the pile. Flailing, the conglomerate of apparel threw the door open and dashed down the sidewalk. Expecting to have to sidestep pedestrians, Hagakure was bewildered when everyone ran. Not a single person stayed to watch a hero detain her. Taking the blessing, the thrift store raider sprinted down another 5 blocks, only crossing a street if a crosswalk was ready. Otherwise, the girl would turn the corner and sprint down the side road. Breathing hard and worried about losing more than just underwear, Toru ducked into an alleyway. She expected a dead end, but instead saw it led out into some kind of parking lot access. Hiding behind a dumpster that smelled of rancid tomatoes and mold, the exhausted girl opened her hand. The spare boot, not currently on her foot, fell to the floor, allowing tired arms to lose some of their burden. Flexing a cramped wrist while still hugging the clothes, Toru looked around, listening hard for the inevitable chase of a hero. Several minutes of inactivity passed. While the lack of any agency's immediate response was troubling, it was hard to be upset. Dropping her bundle onto a relatively dry, if not entirely clean spot, the teen got dressed. Looking around more closely, Toru spotted a door further down the brick wall. An Italian caricature stood invitingly above, hoisting a pizza to indicate the establishment's nature. A growl gurgled from beneath Hagakure's hideous floral print hoodie. Turning, trepidation wormed its way into the lost kid's stomach as she regarded the dumpster behind her. Time to see exactly how generous Hote-sama was feeling. Tuesday, September 4th, 4:28 p.m. Kodo-kun. The boy went positively purple and tensed up, startled at the principal's direct assessment. Did you notice anything strange when you last saw Hagakure-chan? He was saved from answering when the calm, deep voice of Shoji spoke up beside him. No, Kocho-sensei. Both Kodo-kun and I were together with her when she decided to grab drinks for us. She was not under any duress, and I had acute vision on all of our surroundings at the time. She was just being sweet. She noticed my throat hurt without me even saying anything. I thought she came back when I saw Cementos-sensei handing out water. Koda sagged in on himself with every passing word. Earlier, only a few of 1A had been hanging in the main lounge of the dorms. Now, the entire class took up station around a small mouse and their homeroom teacher for the announcement. Aizawa clutched a laptop flat to one side. The silent device sustained no data corruption solely because it lacked moving parts. In the man's other arm was a yellow roll of bedding. Stepping up behind the petting hero, a blonde whose most prominent feature was a massive tail of corded muscle put a hand on the despairing boy's shoulder. After a slight jump, Koda settled under the brotherly pat. "It's not your fault," Ojiro informed with conviction. Several more stressed faces stood around the room, but most of the class remained quiet, choosing not to interrupt. even the pop-pop of small explosions stilled. Midoriya leaned forward in his spot on one of the couches. The green armrest beneath his hand dimpled with what would have been bruising force on a living thing, but the microswade remained unscathed. The analyst's gaze nearly lit the floor on fire with its intensity. "He's absolutely right," Nezu announced. "I'm here to see if there are any details I missed." Pointing paws is unproductive at best. The rodent surveyed the students. "Is there anything more?" The commanding tone of Aizawa blanketed the class, demanding answers from anyone who had them. The underground hero wasn't faring much better than his students, but he hid it well, pinning them with a severe gaze. Izuku waited, listening hard. A couple of his peers voiced upset that the class had been left in the dark for the past few hours, but no new information came to light. Studying his homeroom teacher, All Might's successor found it impossible to be frustrated. Aizawa-sensei had previously sustained countless injuries in everyone's defense, and the choice he made this time was clearly strategic. There was always a chance UA's staff could have located or rescued Hagakure-chan before any major incident occurred. It was better not to instill panic when all the facts weren't in. Besides, the faculty probably could have gotten away with not telling anyone until tomorrow, before things would have started to smell of rotting roe. The fact that they hadn't showed a respect for their students. Mind racing with all the topics to consider, Midoriya's right hand subconsciously reached up to cup a slightly rounded chin. The sudden abduction of a UA student could have something to do with Kurogiri, or even that suffocating liquid quirk that teleported Kacchan into the warehouse full of Nomu. But why take Hagakure-chan? Her profile didn't match up with Kacchan's at all. Was she bait? Was a villain trying to lure out All Might again? Killing Hagakure-chan or All Might after he had effectively retired would definitely be a crushing blow to both UA and society's already shaky trust in heroes. The villain wouldn't even have to kill Hagakure-chan. Just taking her, a student who didn't stand out in any major way, sent a message that no one was safe. A detonation rocked Izuku out of his thoughts. The boy's right ear kept ringing even as Bakugo pulled a soot-smeared hand away. "I said shut up, nerd. Your mumbling is disgusting." The greenette looked around the room, startled to see everyone watching with horrified gazes. Midoriya's skin turned ghost white, and the boy's eyes dropped. Sorry everyone. I didn't realize I was thinking out loud again." While avoiding everyone's looks, Izuku finally noticed the abused armrest under his left hand and unclenched white fingers from the green fabric. Pulling the offending limb down near his thigh, he rubbed the sweat off his palm. Aizawa shot a mildly annoyed look Midoriya's way, but spoke up. "If you have nothing further to share, then it's our turn." The loose circle of children turned to watch as Nezu cut between Aoyama and Tsuyu, leaving the center of the room for the TV area. Upon reaching it, the intelligent animal crawled onto the coffee table in front, then assumed a formal stance with arms clasped behind a business-casual vest. Aizawa followed, riding the laptop on his boss's stage, then plugged a dongle into a slot at the bottom of the flat screen. The television lit up, a video set to play. As the homeroom teacher got ready, all the students formed a new ring. Midoriya was lucky enough to not have to move, simply rearranging himself to face the other way on the couch. Nezu motioned toward the eraser hero, blinking beady eyes as he did so. The sideways triangle in the middle of the display clicked. As the scene at Gym Gamma became apparent, a strange overlayment lit up, shades of scarlet and cobalt coloring the visual. "Be back in a second." A red humanoid figure waved behind at Koda and Shoji. Neither of the two seemed to see the parting motion, but responded to the words. "Thank you, Hagakure-chan." The hoarse voice came from the anilingual, whose body temperature visually came across on the recording as cooler than the other two's. "Much appreciated." Shoji's head dipped in a polite bow. By far the warmest of the three, the boy's figure was low-lighted in variations of nearly mahogany sheen. "Tell me if you notice anything unusual in the video," Nezu addressed the entire class. "You may watch it as many times as you wish to make sure nothing was missed." "May I plug in, sir?" Kyoka's jack lifted in askance. "By all means." The red figure of Hagakure thumped along in a jog, the girl making her way outside of Gym Gamma. The two teachers who would have normally heard the exit helped other students throughout the gym. While the security footage played, the principal watched the students in the lounge closely, checking for any change in their facial features. There. Pause. Nezu pinned Kyoka with an unblinking look. The frame stayed frozen on Hagakure's vague form, one scarlet foot poised to take another step towards the drink dispensers 10 feet away. "I don't think it's anything, but the audio changed a bit. There was an almost crackled muffle just now." A fingerless gloved hand reached up, holding the listening ear like a secret agent speaking into a mic set. Nezu mentally filed the information away, kept in the ironclad vault that was high spec. Let me know if you hear anything else." A nod answered and the footage resumed. Much of the class had a hard time deciding what to watch, the recording or the resident musician. The thermal image that was Hagakure approached the vending machine, hand out to select a button labeled U-Atorade. A curly wire spun and the electrolyte-infused sugar water pushed forward. Suddenly, the screen fuzzed at various places. One such unfocused part, directly beneath the girl's feet, took on a green tint. What seemed like an error in the video's recording quickly revealed itself to be part of the scene. There was a nearly comical parallel in the way both Hagakure and the liquid refreshment dropped, disappearing from view simultaneously. "Wait, play that back." Aizawa immediately complied without Nezu asking. Now there was no question on what had the group's attention, all eyes on Kyoka. "There's some kind of static in the background. Can you turn up the volume about 15 decibels? A few blank stares had her rephrasing. "If the TV is on 8, turn it up to 17? Sero was closest to the remote, and clicked the button on the side 9 times as the video rewound again. Kyoka's earphone jack suddenly jerked from the aux port on the TV, and the girl stayed frozen, face pale and sweating. Shrieking. The word was barely audible. Then, louder. It sounds like 1,000 voices crying and screaming in anguish. A concerned Uraraka hugged Jiro from the side, as Nezu twitched almost imperceptibly. "I will leave a copy of the recording here, so you may rewatch it. If you find anything else, please notify me no matter the time." The mouse sighed, and the exhale bore a crushing weight, assessing the room slowly in what was an obvious stall for time. The principal was saved from his impending words by a no-nonsense voice to his right. "In light of what happened today, all work studies will be cancelled until further notice." Aizawa angled more into view, keeping cross-legged as he leaned back from the laptop screen. A chorus of dismay sounded around the room, the exclamation seeming to be rooted more in compound worries than true anger. Ida tried to console everyone, flailing arms even more rigid than normal, and a furrowed brow at odds with his words. Tokoyami bore a grimace, beak somehow mixing self-disgust and determination into one. Ishido looked positively sick. Midoriya was drowning in feelings. The work studies were supposed to help the class grow stronger, teaching them how to react faster, notice problems, and resolve them quicker. Being good wasn't just about physical strength, but awareness, prediction, and self-reliance. Izuku needed that experience. He hadn't even noticed his friend was in danger until it was way too late. The aspiring hero had been straight up incapable. Frustration swamped All Might's successor, and the boy clutched at his pants subconsciously to keep tears from falling. Eyes lifting from the wadded fabric of his lap, Izuku watched as Aizawa laid out a buttercup sleeping bag. He could only imagine how the Eraser hero was feeling. Tuesday, September 4th, 6:00 p.m. Hagakure glanced at a tree's shadow. In the last 15 minutes it had gained quite a bit of length while she'd been scouting the area. It indicated approximately an hour or so before sunset. The invisible girl had been conspicuous in bright sweatpants and a garish hoodie, and had had to strip once again to make it this far. But it had been worth it. Somehow, in the middle of town was a park. Better yet, it had been a well-manicured, nearly bug-free locale with the drinking fountain. Camping was once again a viable prospect. Toru continued searching for a spot to sleep, passing by several boxwoods. Tucked beneath and nearly hidden from sight was a wad of clothes. Getting them there had been a tricky matter, but she'd finally managed by way of a bizarre, pedestrian-judged game of red light, green light that had spanned several blocks. Despite a shiver of longing, the naked teen steadfastly walked away. Toru had gone left from the big oak tree last time, and now headed opposite. There was no underbrush to push through, just expanses of grass and flower beds covered in bark chips to suppress weeds. Landscape shrubs, tiny evergreens, and the occasional bout of coreopsis and aster populated the area. A larger stand of slippery elm loomed further in, promising a drove of insects within its shelter. Toru avoided it, skirting the copse and doubling back around, until someone screamed. Adrenaline spiked, but only for a moment. The yell had been less threatened citizen and more child screeching and excitement. Curious, Hagakure strolled back towards the elms that scoffed at her presence, doing their best to unnerve the teen as she remained completely unaffected. Sneaking around the trees, that actually had undergrowth, Toru popped her head out from behind a bush. Nothing of the girl could be seen, but the action was habit. Holy crap, that kid shouting could only have been a sign from the universe. In front of the increasingly lucky young woman was a massive playground. She'd have to find a way to buy a lotto soon at this rate. Eyes scanned the premise quickly, honing in on a large yellow tube connecting 2 portions of a wooden lookout structure. The plastic section was likely to stay much warmer and drier than any shelter Hagakure could make in the next hour. An offshoot of evenly spaced bars for hanging and a web of braided climbing rope decorated the closest side of the structure. Further away, on the other end, was a circular slide sure to crackle hair and zap any butt who dared use it. Another scream of joy and thump-thump-thumping of little feet reminded the UA student she'd only be able to stay here at night when it was unoccupied. Even knowing that, and the fact that she'd have to find a way to cover both ends of the tube for heat retention, she still rode a wave of minor euphoria. The wind changed abruptly, and the scent of artery-clogging fast food teased at the hungry teen's nose. There might even be a restaurant nearby. What a find. Tuesday, September 4th, 7:00 p.m. What on earth is wrong with you? You call yourself an educator when you constantly put the students' lives at risk? The male's voice, which was unaccustomed to yelling, went hoarse with emotion and strain. My baby girl, my little Tora, you failed her. An empty sleeve descended, eclipsing one of a different style below. As it settled gently over top, the stream of indignation coming from the man slowed, then stopped. You promised. You promised us this would never happen again, that the dorm system would fix this. The words were soft, carrying with them the silent death of poison rather than the harsh blow of a club. Bowing prostrate on the floor of the small apartment, Nezu failed to answer. For the first time since gaining higher intelligence, the mouse nearly wished to return to his former life. It was both a gift and a curse to feel such shame so acutely. Had the rodent been physiologically capable, his cheeks would have been aflame. I will do everything in my power to bring Tori-chan home to you. If I am unable, I will resign my position as head of UA. The promise was a commitment, not empty placations. Toru's father tensed, hand nearly crushed in his wife's previously comforting grip. The next words were cold steel. See that you do. Chapter notes. There was a Mr. Lancer cameo. No, Aizawa didn't just up and take a nap after the serious discussion. He's just too paranoid to be any further from his students and is absolutely going to sleep in the living room instead of his room from now on. Hagakure-chan is not actually all that lucky, she's just a positive thinker. Giant centipedes are venomous in Japan. Hote-sama is one of the 7 lucky gods in Japanese culture and is dedicated to happiness and contentment. A Yuki-onna is a Japanese monster that literally translates to snow woman. And yes, Uatorade is an obvious ripoff of Gatorade.